told you the Titanic wasn't actually doomed by, a giant block of ice.
I mean, it is the popular myth.
Right. But it was actually brought down by a 10-second miscommunication, a missing pair of binoculars, and, well, a corporate executive's obsession with a speed record.
Which is just wild when you really dig into it.
It totally is. I mean, if you're listening to this, you obviously already know the ship sinks, but we've all been so heavily conditioned by Hollywood romances and those sweeping cinematic scores to view April 10th, 1912 through this very specific, almost mythological lens.
Yeah, we tend to romanticize the tragedy.
Exactly. So today's mission is to peel all of that back. We're doing a deep dive into the actual source material to explore this shocking, cascading sequence of hubris, relentless corporate pressure, and just fatal human errors.
It really is a cascade.
It is. And if you've ever been in a situation where you felt overwhelmed by how quickly a seemingly foolproof, perfectly engineered plan can completely fall apart, well, this deep dive is basically the ultimate historical case study for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because to truly understand how those seemingly minor details cascaded into a disaster of this magnitude, we have to first understand the psychological landscape of the era.
Right, the whole mindset in 1912.
Exactly. The early 20th century was defined by this absolute, almost religious faith in technology and industrial progress. I mean, society genuinely believed it had conquered nature.
Which is just such a dangerous way to think.
It really is. And that specific mindset directly set the stage for what became the myth of the unsinkable ship.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sheer scale of the Titanic was just staggering. But I really want to get a sense of just how massive this undertaking was from a pure engineering standpoint.
It was massive. We're talking about a vessel that was 269 meters long.
Wow.
Over 53 meters high. To put that in perspective, building it cost the equivalent of $400 million in today's money.
$400 million, just for one ship.
Just for one ship. And it was designed to carry everyone from the wealthiest, most renowned industrialists in the world right down to hopeful immigrants looking for a better life in America.
Right, a real cross-section of society.
Exactly. But honestly, the ship was less a mode of transportation and more, a floating palace designed to completely blind people to the reality of the ocean. The sources detail these gorgeous stained glass mirrors, ornate wood paneling, 2 grand staircases, and heated swimming pools.
Wait, I read about a Turkish bath, too, and an electric bath, a squash court, and like 4 different restaurants. I mean, it sounds like a modern-day mega resort, not a 1912 steamship.
Oh, the facilities could easily outshine most 5-star hotels on land back then.
That's insane.
But underneath all of that luxury, that's where you find the safety features that bred this fatal arrogance. The Titanic featured a double-bottom hull and 16 separate watertight compartments.
Right, the famous compartments.
Yes, and the engineering math dictated that even if 4 of those 16 compartments were completely flooded, the ship would effortlessly stay afloat.
4 out of 16. Okay.
Yeah, which created such a massive sense of security that the vice president of the White Star Line, the company that built the ship, literally went out in front of the public and unequivocally declared it unsinkable.
Hold on, I have to push back here. Because if they had 16 watertight compartments and the ship could survive with 4 of them completely filled with water, wasn't sinking a freak mathematical anomaly? Like, how does a scrape from an iceberg actually defeat that level of engineering?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the overconfidence in that engineering actually masked some fundamental design flaws. Let's look at the double-bottomed hull.
Okay.
It sounds incredibly safe, right? But that double layer of steel only covered the literal bottom of the ship.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it did not extend up the sides. The sides of the ship only had one single layer of metal protecting them from the freezing ocean.
Oh, wow. So they were super vulnerable on the side.
Extremely vulnerable. And furthermore, those 16 watertight compartments we talked about, they were separated by massive steel walls called bulkheads.
Okay, so think of the lower decks like a giant ice cube tray, right? Where the bulkheads are the dividers keeping the water isolated in individual cubes.
It is a perfect visualization. But here is the fatal flaw. In that ice cube tray, the bulkheads didn't reach all the way to the ceiling.
Wait, why on earth would you build watertight walls that don't actually seal at the top? That defeats the whole purpose.
It does. But it goes back to that luxury we mentioned earlier. To cap the bulkheads at the ceiling, the designers would have had to interrupt the lavish, sweeping passenger corridors that ran the whole length of the ship.
You've got to be kidding me.
No, they literally prioritized aesthetic grandeur over structural integrity. They just assumed the water would never get high enough to spill over.
I mean, it is like buying one of those military-grade, heavy-duty phone cases and being so incredibly confident in the marketing that you intentionally throw your phone off a 3-story roof just to test it out, you know? You just stop acting carefully because you think the technology will save you.
That's exactly it. And building a glass-jawed ship was really only half the problem here. That same corporate arrogance bled directly into how the ship was driven in the days leading up to the crash.
Right, the speed.
Yeah. So between April 12th and April 14th, the Titanic received multiple ice warnings from other ships crossing the Atlantic.
Other ships were actually radioing them.
Constantly, warning them of massive ice fields right ahead. And despite this, the Titanic maintained a blazing speed of 21.5 knots, which is roughly 40 kilometers per hour.
Which seems insane for a 62-year-old, highly experienced senior commander like Captain Edward John Smith. Like, why would he ignore direct warnings and plow full speed into an ice field?
You really have to look at the corporate pressure. The source outlines a highly credible theory that Joseph Bruce, the chairman and managing director of the White Star Line, was actively pressuring Captain Smith.
That's just to go faster.
Yeah, because the White Star Line didn't just want a successful maiden voyage. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to break a 6-day speed record to prove the Titanic wasn't just the biggest and most luxurious, but also the fastest ship in the world.
So it was a PR stunt. And the source actually notes a specific, honestly infuriating incident at 2:00 p.m. on April 14th, which is the very day they hit the iceberg.
Oh, the pocketed warning.
Yes. Captain Smith actually handed an ice warning to Joseph Bruce, and Bruce took the paper, folded it up, and just stuffed it into his pocket. He actively hid the data so the other crew members wouldn't find out and demand they slow down.
It's unbelievable.
And Captain Smith even canceled a scheduled safety drill that very same day.
It is the ultimate confirmation bias. I mean, they had the data. They had 7 specific ice warnings on April 14th alone, but they just discarded it because it didn't fit their narrative of a record-breaking invincible triumph.
Right, it didn't fit the brand.
Exactly. And this willful ignorance directly set the stage for the night of the 14th. By 11:39 p.m., the sun had set hours ago, and the temperature had completely plummeted. There was no moon, meaning zero moonlight, and visibility was incredibly low.
And freezing cold winds were just whipping across the deck.
Right.
So the guy stationed up in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet, he basically had to spot an iceberg in pitch black darkness with watering eyes from the wind and absolutely no moonlight to illuminate the ice.
Yeah, it was an impossible task.
Plus, I read he didn't even have binoculars because they were locked in a cabinet and the officer with the key was reassigned right before the ship left port.
Yeah, Fleet was effectively blind up there. He spotted that iceberg purely by chance at the very, very last possible second.
And this wasn't just some small chunk of ice.
No, we're talking about a mountain of ice. It was estimated to be 200 by 400 feet long, basically the size of a football field, matching the height of the crow's nest itself and weighing 1.5 million tons.
Unbelievable.
So at 11:39 p.m., he rings the warning bell 3 times, grabs the phone, calls the bridge, and just screams that there is an iceberg directly ahead.
Which takes us into that fateful 60-second window. The first officer, William, hears the message and immediately gives the order to steer the ship to the left to avoid the collision. But the steersman, Robert Hitchens, turns the wheel to the right.
Yep.
He steers the ship directly toward the iceberg. How does a trained professional make that kind of catastrophic error in the most crucial moment of his life?
Well, it really comes down to a systemic failure in how maritime steering was transitioning at the time. In 1912, the whole world was shifting from sail power to steam power.
Okay.
Under the old sailing system known as tiller orders, if you wanted the ship to go left, you actually pushed the tiller to the right.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but under the new steamship system rudder orders, turning the wheel right made the ship go right. Hitchens was trained under the old tiller system.
So in the sheer terror and panic of the moment, his muscle memory just took over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He received the order to go left, and his panicked brain told his hands to turn the wheel right.
And by the time Hitchens realized his mistake, the momentum of this massive 269-meter vessel was already locked in. Just 1 minute after Fleet's warning, at 11:40 p.m., the collision happens. But it wasn't a head-on crash, was it?
No, it was graze.
Right, it was a graze along the right side of the bow that lasted just about 10 seconds. And here's where it gets really interesting, because you might be listening to this and wondering, how does frozen water tear open a solid metal ship? But instead of thinking about it like a car hitting a tree, think of it like taking a can opener to a tin can.
The physics of that moment are just terrifying, because the steel used to build the Titanic actually contained high levels of sulfur.
Which means what exactly?
It means it was incredibly brittle in freezing temperatures. So when that brittle steel met 1.5 million tons of dense ancient ice, the ice didn't just bump the ship.
Right.
The sheer mass of it acted like a blade, slicing open that single-layered side of the hull for 300 feet.
And because it scraped along the side, that 10-second graze popped open the hull across 6 separate watertight compartments.
Which completely shatters the engineering math we talked about earlier.
Well, because it could only survive 4.
Exactly. 6 compartments breached meant the water would rapidly fill those first 6 sections of our ice cube tray. And because the bulkheads didn't reach the ceiling, once the water hit the top of the 6th compartment, the weight pulled the front of the ship down.
Causing the water to just spill over the top into the 7th compartment.
Yep, then the 8th, and so on. The captain and the ship's architect, Thomas Andrews, they went down to inspect the damage almost immediately. And standing there in the freezing water, they knew the ship was mathematically doomed.
The unsinkable ship was actually going to sink. But the passengers had absolutely no idea, did they?
None at all.
Yeah.
They had internalized the marketing so deeply that they refused to believe they were in any real danger.
That is so tragic.
It really is. Captain Smith orders the evacuation, prioritizing women and children. But the passengers are annoyed. They literally think standing out in the freezing cold is a massive overreaction.
Yeah, I read they were playing with chunks of ice on the deck.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the true psychological tragedy of the Titanic. The physical technology failed instantly upon impact. But the myth of the technology, the brand identity of the unsinkable ship, persisted in the minds of the passengers for hours.
And that cognitive dissonance cost irreplaceable lives. I mean, the very first lifeboat launch had a capacity of 65 people, and it was lowered into the ocean with only 28 people on board.
Because nobody wanted to get in.
Right. But as the compartments keep filling with water, the ship starts to tilt forward, pushing the bow underwater and lifting the giant rear propellers completely out of the sea.
And that is when the pandemonium finally hits.
People realize they're actually going to die, and the panic is absolute, especially when they realize the horrific math of the lifeboats.
Yeah, the math is grim. There were only 20 lifeboats on board, which is enough for about 1,200 people.
But there were around 2,200 people on the ship.
Exactly. It was a completely artificial scarcity created by the arrogance of the ship's designers, who honestly thought extra lifeboats would just clutter the deck of a ship that would never need them.
Unbelievable. So, as the lifeboats run out, the crew's focus entirely shifts to a desperate search for help. At midnight, senior radio operator Jack Phillips begins frantically sending out distress calls.
And a ship called the RMS Carpathia actually picks up the signal at 12:20 a.m.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they respond, turn around, and push their engines to the absolute limit to come to the rescue. The only problem is the Carpathia is 107 kilometers away.
Which is pretty far.
It's very far. Even at top speed, it's going to take them 3.5 hours to reach the Titanic, time the Titanic simply did not have.
But there is a detail that truly haunts this entire historical event. Because there was another ship, the SS Californian.
Yes, California.
And they were not 107 kilometers away. They were only 37 kilometers away. I mean, they were so close that the passengers standing on the freezing deck of the Titanic could actually see the Californian on the horizon. An officer even pointed it out, telling passengers not to worry because rescue was right there, in plain sight.
It's agonizing to think about.
So what does this all mean? Our source states the Californian had actually warned the Titanic about icebergs just an hour before the crash. Then, the Californian did the smart thing. They stopped for the night because of the danger, and their radio operator turned off his equipment and went to sleep at 1100 p.m.
Which was standard practice back then.
Right. But even without the radio, the Californian's crew physically saw the distress flares and rockets that the Titanic was firing into the night sky after midnight. So how could a seasoned captain, Stanley Lord, see emergency rockets over an ice field and just write it off as a midnight fireworks show?
Well, Captain Lord insisted the rockets were not a distress signal. He actually told his crew that the rich men on Titanic were probably just having a late-night party.
A party? In the middle of an ice field?
Yes. He let the myth override the empirical evidence, blazing right in front of his eyes. He just assumed the Titanic was simply too grand, too technologically advanced to ever be in genuine danger.
Wow.
And it's worth noting, both British inquiries after the fact put heavy blame on Captain Lord.
I mean, while you can't pin a systemic disaster on just one man, Because of the lack of lifeboats, the canceled safety drills, the corporate pressure to speed it, it's just agonizing to know a rescue ship just sat there 37 kilometers away, watching the greatest tragedy of the century unfold and doing absolutely nothing.
That failure to act definitely sealed the fate of over 1,000 people. By 2:05 a.m., the very last lifeboat is lowered into the water. 1,500 people are still stranded on board.
That's horrifying.
And at 2:20 a.m., just 2 hours and 40 minutes after grazing the iceberg, the structural stress just becomes too much. Eyewitnesses reported the ship literally breaking in half before plunging into the depths.
1,500 people perished. And the source makes a grim but important distinction here. Most didn't actually drown. They died of hypothermia. The water was -2 degrees Celsius.
It's lethal.
Yeah, at that temperature, a human body simply shuts down in a matter of minutes. And Captain Edward Smith, keeping to maritime tradition, stayed at the wheel and went down with his ship.
Meanwhile, the Carpathia, the ship that actually pushed its engines to the limit to help, arrived at the coordinates between 3:30 and 4 a.m.
They were just an hour too late.
An hour too late.
Yeah.
They found a sea of floating bodies and managed to pull the survivors from the scattered lifeboats.
God, the aftermath of this disaster must have completely rewritten the rules of the ocean. It was a wake-up call that completely shattered the blind optimism of the early 1900s.
Oh, absolutely. The regulatory legacy of the Titanic is profound. In 1914, the International Ice Patrol was formed to monitor and alert ships about icebergs.
That makes sense.
But more importantly, it led to the SOLAS Treaty, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea.
What did that do?
That treaty finally mandated the most basic common sense rule imaginable. A ship must carry sufficient lifeboats for every single passenger on board.
It's crazy it took a disaster of this scale to make that a rule, and it actually took over 70 years for humanity to even lay eyes on the ship again.
Right? It was lost for decades.
Yeah, in September 1985, ocean explorer Robert Ballard finally found the wreckage sitting 3.8 kilometers deep at the bottom of the ocean, with the two halves resting 600 meters apart.
It was a massive discovery.
Huge, but there is a modern twist to this story. Because the environment is actually reclaiming the ship, deep-sea bacteria are literally eating away at the metal framework as we speak.
Yes, the iron-eating bacteria.
Right. Scientists project that by the year 2030, the physical wreckage of the Titanic will completely disintegrate.
This raises an important question about how we interact with history, though, because for over a century, the Titanic has remained an absolute fixation in the global consciousness.
Oh, 100%. Which perfectly explains the whole saga of Titanic, too.
Oh, right.
Yeah, in 2012, an Australian billionaire named Clive Palmer announced he was going to build an exact copycat replica of the original ship and sail the exact same route.
And he demanded it be built with the exact same constraints as the original to maintain authenticity, didn't he?
He did, and this is where I just have to laugh at the dark irony of it all. Because the project was supposed to launch in 2016, then it got delayed to 2022, and eventually it just fizzled out.
Really? Why?
Well, because if you build an exact replica of a 1912 steamship, you don't have televisions, and you certainly don't have Wi-Fi. No one wanted to buy a ticket for a ship without internet.
Wow.
Yeah, the original passengers died because of a lack of radio communication, and the modern replica died because of a lack of internet communication.
That's incredibly ironic.
Yeah.
But it really highlights how we commodify tragedies. We try to recreate the luxury and the aesthetics for entertainment, completely missing the actual lessons.
We really do.
The true, enduring legacy of the Titanic isn't the opulence, or the grand staircases, or even a billionaire's vanity project. The legacy is the SOLAS regulations. It is the safety standards that have protected millions of lives at sea over the last century.
That's a really great point. So let's take a step back and recap this incredible journey. We started with an opulent, floating palace that was universally hailed as an unsinkable dream.
Right.
But that dream was systematically dismantled by a cascade of ignored warnings, extreme corporate pressure to break a speed record, a tragic muscle memory steering error, and the bitter, devastating irony of a rescue ship that sat just on the horizon and watched the rockets fire into the night sky.
It's a stark reminder for anyone navigating complex systems today.
How so?
Well, no matter how advanced your technology is or how foolproof your engineering seems, unchecked hubris and a willful disregard for the data right in front of your eyes can sink even the grandest of endeavors. The Titanic didn't fail because it was poorly built. It failed because the people running it refused to believe it could fail.
The Titanic is the ultimate testament to what happens when we place blind faith in our own creations. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought based on our source material today.
Okay.
By the year 2030, bacteria will have completely eaten away the physical wreckage of the Titanic, leaving nothing but the ocean floor. When the actual, tangible, physical evidence of this great ship is entirely erased from the earth in just a few short years, will our obsession with the myth finally begin to fade away? Or will the legend only grow stronger once the truth is completely invisible?
Wow.
Something to think about the next time you put all your trust in an unsinkable plan. Catch you on the next deep dive.